Hello and welcome to this new tutorial. My name is Flo from flomotion.eu, and today I am going to show you how you can create this nice intro animation here with some of the really cool products from Digital Juice. So before we get started, let me quickly tell you what we are going to learn today. So we basically have to work on two different versions of this same footage. For the first version, we just want to make it look beautiful, and for that we are going to use a cool product called Light Leaks. And for the second one, we want to go for this rough look. We want to somehow mimic this Sin City look where everything is just black and white, but the red of the surfboard really pops out. And I also want to try to give it a little bit of a cartoon look. And for the rough touch, we want to add another cool plugin from Digital Juice called Film Clutter. And when we are finished with creating those two versions, we want to combine them with some animated mats, which are also from Digital Juice, the breakthrough mats. And here I want to show you how you can customize those mats. So what you're going to learn is how you can create a shadow for those mats so that they look a little bit more three-dimensional. And I'm also going to show you how you can make those edges look more round and how to fill up the gaps between the mats for a completely different look. After that, we are going to track the mats and add a cool title to it. And at the very end, I'm going to show you how to give the shot a final touch with some color corrections, a vignette, and everything you need to make this shot look beautiful. So let's start by opening up the juicer and collect all the files we want to use for our surf project. So let's go to Animations, Drag and Drop, and we start with the Light Leaks. And for my project, I want to use the flickering specs. And for that, I just click and choose Add Item to Batch. And here we have it in our batch panel. And we do the same thing with the film clutter that I want to use. Here I want to use the grainy stains, Add Items to Batch. And the last one is one of the Matte Magic from the Breakthroughs collection. Here I want to go for the tilted rules. And I go for this one here. So I also add it to the batch list. And let me go into the setting for those clips. So I click on one of them, Settings, and here I have all of the settings. I want to choose a frame rate of 25, as I want to make a 25 frames per second project later on. And here on the output I want to change the output location. And I've already created a surf intro folder. And if I now click on here, Save Location, I can apply this location to all current batch items. If I click on the other ones now, you can see that the output location stays the same. But I also want them to have 25 frames. And another very important thing is that I change the field order in the output format, because I don't want upper or lower fields. I want no fields at all, so I choose progressive. Because especially for the mats, this is very important later on, because we want to track the motion, and so we want to have as many info as possible. Okay, but this looks nice to me for now, and I click on Render All. And now we're finished with rendering, and we can check out our clips in the Explorer. And there we have them. And I just drag and drop them into After Effects. And back in the Explorer, I'm also going to get my surf footage file. And while I'm at it, let me just save this. Save as, and I just override my last version of this. So, as I told you in the beginning, we have to make two different versions of this surf footage clip. So let me just drag this onto the new composition icon. And now here's a nice shortcut for you, which not only works in the project window, but everywhere inside After Effects. Just select a footage file or a composition and hit Ctrl D for duplicate. Now we have two different compositions and can work on two different surf footage files without destroying the original file. So let's directly name them by hitting the return button. And we want to make one version look really beautiful, so we call it 01 Beauty, and the next one is 02, and we want to give this rough Sin City look, so let's call it Rough Sin City, and hit OK. And let's directly start with creating the look for our beauty shot. I open it up by simply double clicking on it, and to make this shot even more beautiful, we just apply some light leaks to it, and in this case it's the flickering specks, and we just drag and drop them onto our footage file. And now all I have to do is change the blending mode. So let's try it with a add. And this really helps selling the feel of this hot, warm summer day. And for our beauty composition, there's really not much more to do, so we can just close it and go into our Sin City shot. And I want to start here with desaturate the whole clip, but leaving the red color in this surfbird, like the effect in Sin City. So I could simply do that with a leave color effect, which simply leaves the color you select, in this case the red color, but I want to prepare this shot a little bit so that the red stands out a bit more and the leave color effect has more color information to work with. For that, let's try a shift channels effect. And what the effect allows you to do is you can map the different RGB and alpha values to different channels. So in this case, the alpha doesn't really matter because our clip doesn't have alpha and we don't need alpha here. For the red channel, we want to stay red because that's our color information. But as you can see, our clip is super bright. We just have white and a little light blue over here. So for the green channel, let's go to luminance. And the same for the blue. So the most information lies now in the red channel. What is exactly what we want. And to give the leaf color effect, which we are going to apply later on, even more information to work with, let's add a hue and saturation effect right after the shift channels. And here we are doing exactly the same. We go into each channel, we leave the red, but desaturate all the other ones. You can see that just the red stays. And now we can apply our leaf color effect. And the leaf color effect is really a simple one. You have the color to leave, you have an amount to decolor, and you have tolerance and edge softness settings. So at first you simply have to pick a color you want to leave. In this case it's red. And now we bring up the amount to decolor because at the moment we are not decoloring at all. and at 100% it still looks nearly the same. So we bring down the tolerance. And if we bring it down all the way to 0, you can see that the only color that stays now is exactly the same color that we have picked. And to bring it up a bit more, we could play with the tolerance, but for this let's try it with the edge softness. If we bring it just up a little bit, 1 or maybe 2, and maybe even increase the tolerance a little bit. And now you can see what we are doing when I turn on and off the effect. Now we are really just dealing with this red color of our surfboard here. But to be honest, with all this shift channels and hue and saturation, our red also looks a bit desaturated, so let's just apply a second version of our hue and saturation effect. And here we just go into the red channels and bring it up. Maybe to 32. And if we take a closer look now, you can see that the edges look a bit strange over here. And it would be nice if we could just blur out the reds a little bit so that we have a nice feathered edge around our board. And we can do that by a simple channel blur. And the effect does exactly what you expect it to do. It blurs different channels. So in this case, we want to blur the red channel. So let's try it with a small number, maybe just 1. And if we take a close look at this border here, you can see that this really helps. So let's close all the effects. And now we want to work on the overall look of this footage here. And for that we apply once again nice digital juice product, the grainy stains which come from the film clutter product. It is as simple as always, you just have to drag and drop it out onto your footage and just change the blending mode. And by the way, if you can't see the blending modes over here, you can just hit this toggle switch button. And there you have your blending modes. And as we just deal with white and black, let's try the multiply blending mode. Yes, this really looks nice. So now we can also close this composition. And now we want to work on our mattes. So let's import our mattes, or in other words, let's just drag them over the new composition icon and have a closer look at our mattes. And maybe we also name them. And you can see over here that all the different mattes are animating in and then they are animating out. Really nice. But if I click on this toggle transparency grid, you can see that it's just black and white. And at first I want to create an alpha channel out of the black just to work with it a little better and to show you the further steps a bit better. So that is really easy. We just duplicate it once again by hitting Ctrl D. And for our track matte, we this time want to use a Luma matte. And maybe you can't see it because it's all the way down here. You have the Luma matte. And what this does is that it looks at the layer above, and everywhere where there's black there will be transparency, and white is no transparency. At the moment it looks the same as before, but let me now click on this toggle transparency button and you'll see the difference. Now everywhere where the black has been, we have now nothing. It's transparent. Perfect. So now let's work a little bit on the look of those mattes. Because at the beginning I told you that I want to create a look where all the mattes are combined and we don't have those gaps in between, and we want to have round edges, so we make them more round. And for that we have to work with our mattes composition and not with the layers. And this is why I created a composition with an alpha channel and not just with black and white. So I just closed this and we are ready to create our final comp. We make it about 6 seconds long and hit OK. And here we can import our mattes. And at first we want to close all those gaps here. And we can do that by a simple effect with a simple choker. And normally the choker is used to shrink mattes or everything that has an alpha channel. So if I drag over to the right side, you can see, maybe you can see it now better if I make it a black and white image again. If I drag it to the right, the borders get bigger. But the nice thing about the simple choker is that you can also use negative values. So I can also bring it to the left. And if I click the toggle transparency grid once again, you can see that the holes are now closed. Maybe if I bring in a tint effect real quick, you can see it better. Just colorize all of this white so that you don't get confused with those black lines. So if I drag it to positive values, we get gaps in between, and if I bring it to the left, they are completely closed. Okay, and the next thing is that we want to make the edges round. For that we also take a choker, but this time we take the matte choker. And when we now bring the geometric softness up, you can see that this starts to create round edges. So let's bring this up about 60. But you can also see that the edges are feathered, and if you don't like this effect, you can just go down with the gray level softness. Maybe something like 2. And if I scrub through this now, the nice benefit of this two chokers is that always when they start intersecting, they build those bridges, or they connect now those mattes. So if they are close to each other, they start connecting, but if they drift away, they create gaps. So this creates shapes that haven't been there before. And this makes it really, really interesting. Okay, and now let's bring in our beauty and rough Sin City shots. We want to have the beauty at the bottom, then the rough Sin City, and then the mattes. And now for the rough Sin City, we once again use a track matte, and this one we use the alpha of our mattes. And there we have it. We have our normal shot, and everywhere where the mattes are, we now have our black and white and red image. Really, really nice. So let's go on. We want to create some shadow for this cross here, so that it looks a bit more 3D and that it looks like the cross is really above the other layers. And for that I simply duplicate the mattes layer once again by hitting Ctrl D, shadow, and bring it underneath the rough Sin City and make it visible. And for shadow we just type in shadow and take the drop shadow effect. And here we want to use only the shadow information, so we click on shadow only. And when we bring up the distance, you can see it better. Maybe bring that direction off to the left a bit more. And of course, soften it a lot. Maybe bring up the opacity a little bit. Really nice. And as you can see, the shadow, of course, reacts to the mattes. The next thing to give this a little bit more depth is, and this is something that I've also done in my project, I simply scaled up the beauty shot. And I did that just to have some offset around those edges here. So if I hit the S button for scale, maybe go to 110%, you can see that it now looks like I have this offset which comes through the depth. So now everything is finally set up to bring some titles in. And for that we have to track the motion of our mattes. And to do that we once again duplicate the mattes, solo them, and we want to get rid of all the effects. So we could either turn off all the effects in here, or we once again click on the toggle switches mode, and here we have this effects button for the whole layer. Now we have it without any effects applied. And when I scrub through the clip now, I can see that I want to track the motion of this matte here, because this is the matte that comes in, slows down, and drifts all the way out of the frame again. Okay, and to track some motion within After Effects, we need to have a tracking window. So for the workspace we can simply go to Motion Tracking, and here we have our track window, and here we want to track the motion. So when we click on that, we get our source layer and a track point. And if I zoom in, you can see that it has a middle cross, an inner square, and an outer square. So we bring the middle cross upon that point we want to track. And in this case, I want to track the corner of this matte. And now let me explain to you what those squares are for. The smaller or the inner square is the area for which it searches in the next frame, or the pattern for which it searches. So it searches for a small white area surrounded by this black area. And in the next frame it searches this pattern inside of this area. So when I just go forward one frame, you can see that we have a large movement, so I may want to increase the size of this square. The next step before I start tracking this is that I create a new null object, because later on I want to apply the whole motion to a null object, but you'll see that while we're doing it. So let's create a new layer, null object, and we can directly call it tracking null. And back on our mattes layer, we can now define our target. So we click on Edit Target, and here we can choose all the layers. And as we have created the tracking null as a last one, it is already selected, but you can always select it later on also. And we hit OK. And now we could either track the whole clip or do it frame by frame. And to be sure that everything works fine, I'm just doing this frame by frame. So I click the Analyze One Frame Forward button. But before I do that, let me shrink the search pattern area, because later on the gap is really small, and maybe increase the search area a bit more. Now I click the Analyze One Frame Forward button. Okay, now you can see that I have tracked this motion, and you have seen that I played this a little bit faster because it just took a small while, because I once in a while adjusted those keyframes, and you can always go into each frame and simply drag it to the left or right whenever you feel that you have to do it. But for me this looks really nice now. Maybe let's track this also a little bit backwards. So I go to the first frame, the first keyframe that I have tracked here, and just go into the other direction now. Okay, and now I have tracked all the motion out of this one matte, and when I'm finished with it and after some fine tuning, I can now hit the apply button. And I can click OK here. It just asks me for the dimensions, and X and Y is fine for me. So I click OK. And now you can see this null object which we had created, this red square, and it is following our matte. Perfect. We can hide this matte layer because we just used it as a tracking reference, and we can also hide the tracking null. And now let's create our title text. So we go to the text tool and just type in something that we like, position it in a way that we are happy with it, and I'm just taking this line as a reference. And if I like it, I now have to parent it to the tracking null, and I can simply do that by going to this parent icon, this pick whip, and drag it onto this tracking null. Now it sticks to the motion of this matte. And now I can also close this text tools or even go back to our standard view. And let's take a look at our progress so far. And we can also trim our composition by going to the last frame of the footage, hitting N for end, right mouse button, trim comp to work area. And now we are almost done. But as I want to show you as much as possible in this tutorial, and I want you to learn as much as you can in this short amount of time, I go through a few of my techniques to finalize a shot, or to give the shot the final touch. The first thing that I see is when I look at this image here in the middle of our animation, I see that the surrounding, our beauty background, looks a little bit too bright, too washed out. So I want to bring more contrast and saturation into this clip so that it stands more in contrast with this simply black and white image. So to do that, I apply curves effect to our beauty and also the hue and saturation effect. And with the curves effect, I just want to bring down the midtones, highlights and shadows a little bit. So when I turn it on and off, you'll see that it gets darker, but you also get more contrast on the image. And now I want to see a frame with no mattes, so that I can bring up the saturation a little bit more without destroying the image. Maybe something like 16. Maybe just 12. Yes, that looks fine to me. And the next thing that I have also done in my final animation, and I've also told you about that in the beginning of this tutorial, I wanted to make this Sin City look a little bit more cartoonish, a little bit more painted, or the feel that it is painted. So for that, I applied the Find Edges effect. This is a really strong effect, and when I drag it onto our footage, you will directly see what it does. And now I am applying this to the whole rough Sin City composition. And you can see that it really finds the edges and really brings them to stand out and to pop out. So we want to blend this with the original on a high level, so maybe something like 80%. Now you can see what it is doing. Okay, and the reason why I applied this to the whole composition and not only inside this composition to the footage is that I now also apply this effect not only to the girl with the surfboard, but also to this overlay clip, this film clutter clip. And this just brings both of those clips closer together, and now it really looks like they have always belonged together. And one last thing that I always do on my animations is that I create a nice vignette. And for that I hit Ctrl Y for a new solid and call it Vignette. Or you could also go to Layer, New Solid. And we take the pen tool or simply hit the G button and we could paint a nice vignette. And to get our mask options, you can hit M twice. M. And there we have them. And we want our mask to be subtracted. And we want to feather this border quite a lot. And now we hit T for opacity and just go down with it to about 40% or so. Yes, this really looks nice. And if you also think that this tutorial was nice and if you learned a bit, then feel free to also go onto my page, flomotion.eu. Here you can watch a few more very interesting tutorials all about After Effects, or just get inspired by some of my work. And for now I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and learned a few new effects that you may want to use in your future projects. So now I wish you a lot of fun with After Effects.